Good morning and welcome to our time together this morning. It's great that you've been able to join us today. If you're new to Northgate, you can find out so much more about us on our website, northgate.org.uk. There's a form there whereby you can connect with us and find out more about living a life with Jesus Christ. During this last year, there have been times when I have felt overwhelmed by the challenges we have all faced. Even as we are now beginning the journey out of lockdown, I felt overwhelmed again by the reverse shift of life back into the new normality, whatever that is supposed to look like. This week, as I was reading the Bible, I felt greatly comforted reading the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. You all know the story. 5,000 men and probably at least the same number of women and children have been sat all day listening to Jesus. Supper time arrives and the disciples tell Jesus he should probably wrap things up so that the crowd can go to the nearby takeaways to get food. Jesus, however, turns to them and says the unthinkable. You feed them. Well, if they're anything like me, I can imagine that the disciples were totally dumbfounded and overwhelmed by the size of the need. Peter, never one to be slow at coming forward, probably muttered under his breath, "Hey, that was never part of the deal. How am I supposed to feed the 5,000? You're the Son of God, not me." It is fascinating to me that Jesus does not at this point magic up 10,000 Big Macs, but rather he asks the disciples to give what they have, which on this occasion is a measly 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Here is where the miracle occurs. Taking what they have, Jesus breaks the bread, and with the very little that they have surrendered to him, he feeds the gathered crowd until they are all stuffed. I felt God say to me, I'm not asking you to fix everything. I'm asking you to surrender the little that you are and that you have, and I will sort things out. What a relief. I only have to present the little that I am every day and leave the miracle to him. But the question I asked myself was this: what if the disciples hadn't given their 5 loaves and 2 fish? Would Jesus still have fed the crowd? But often we are tempted not to offer the little that we are or that we have because it's just so small or flawed or just downright inadequate. I really felt God say, never underestimate what can be achieved by our little in the hands of a loving, omnipotent God. Last month, one of Gerald's work colleagues shared a short article from the writer John Mark Comer. He is the author of the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. The article was entitled, Holy Uncertainty. We don't know what is going to happen, and that is okay. This article had a big impact on us as it summarizes how God teaches us to approach life when the whole of life is thrown into chaos and uncertainty. It tries to answer the question of how we should respond when life totally derails our plans and our dreams. Gerald has taken the key elements from this article and shares us with them later this morning.
Psalm 18, 1-3 is all about God being our protector, our rock, our fortress, and our salvation. My English teacher in school commented that when an issue as large as war was covered by the BBC News, the cameras would not try to show it all, but rather focus in on a small part, such as a child's shredded shoe next to a damaged wall, or the remains of a burnt-out car. In this way, the viewer would understand the immensity of the conflict while grasping the personal loss. When faced with the idea of trying to convey the strength, protection, and love of God, I decided to go small. The snail is the most amazing creature who carries his home on his back. His shell is not only a thing of beauty, but it is his mobile place of refuge. It will stand up against most attacks, and the snail can repair a shell that has minor damage. A snail will not survive outside of its shell. Like the snail needing his shell, we need the loving presence of our God. As it says in Psalm 46 verse 1, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Our relationship with our Father may become damaged due to our sin, but unlike the snail shell, it is always repairable. In creation, even the smallest being shows us glimpses of who God is. In Romans 1 verse 20 it says, He has made his wonderful attributes easily perceived. For seeing the visible makes us understand the invisible.
I love you, God, you make me strong. God is my bedrock all day long. I live in the castle of my rescuing night. I'm safe in his glorious granite hideout. My God, the high crag where I run for dear life. I'm hiding behind the boulders. I sing to God the praise lofty and find myself safe and sound.
The man who couldn't see, poor Bartimaeus, his eyes were sick. He couldn't see the sun, he couldn't see the trees, he couldn't see the houses, he couldn't see people, but Bartimaeus could hear. And one day he heard lots of people walking. Step, step, step. He heard lots of people talking. Talk, talk, talk. What is happening? Asked Bartimaeus. What is happening? It's Jesus, somebody said. Jesus is coming down the road. We're all walking with him. It's Jesus, Bartimaeus said to himself. Jesus can make my eyes well. Jesus, he called. Help me! Jesus, help me! Now, lots of people were making noise walking. Lots of people were making noise talking, but Jesus heard Bartimaeus anyway, and Jesus stood still. What do you want me to do for you? He asked kindly. Lord, said Bartimaeus, I want to see again. What do you think Jesus said? I'll tell you what Jesus said. He said, yes, you may see, he told Bartimaeus. And at once Bartimaeus saw the sun, Bartimaeus saw the trees, Bartimaeus saw the houses, Bartimaeus saw the people, but best of all, Bartimaeus saw Jesus. What did you learn? Jesus hears when people talk to him. He heard Bartimaeus. When you talk to Jesus, he hears too.
Well, good morning. And thank you to all those who've contributed with their reflections of Psalm 18. It was such a wonderful evening, the creative evening that we had last month. And please look out for the next one, which is later on at the end of this month. Well, you may just have lost your job and don't know how long it will be before you'll get another one. You may have been on long-term furlough and don't know what's at the end of it. And as Rishi Sunak has given in his latest budget, and his comment on the economy is that it's in the worst slump in our living memory, which consequently could throw all our personal financial security up in the air. You may have just lost a loved one in the COVID crisis. Or you're engaged, but instead of walking down the aisle at your idyllic venue with hundreds of families and friends, your wedding is shaping up to involve matching masks and a link to Zoom. Or you may be a grandparent and have no idea when you can seat your grandchild on your lap or read them a bedtime story. You may be part of a church. Well, we are, by definition, a gathering of people. And you or I have no idea how long it will be until we can come back together again for worship and fellowship. Or you just may be at your wit's end, screaming inside, just how long can I go with homeschooling? That feeling in your body, that cocktail of fear and grief and confusion, is uncertainty. And it's not just uncertainty or the absence of certainty. It is the presence of fear, an unnamed dread. Living through the COVID-19 pandemic has caused us to live in a constant state of uncertainty. Well, here in the West, our tolerance for uncertainty is actually very low. Whereas people who grow up in poverty or grow up in a war zone, well, they know how to make peace with uncertainty. They've had to. Or perhaps people who've experienced trauma or who, let's say, been diagnosed with cancer as a teen. Well, they are way ahead of us. They have had to know how to make peace with uncertainty. However, we are used to feeling in control and planning for the future, because we are used to, in a sense, of being in a forward motion year on year. Now, granted, control is an illusion, but the feeling of control gives us comfort. When I feel in control, I don't have to live by faith. Now, when COVID-19 hit, all sense of control went out the window. And it's now almost a year on. The future is still up in the air. We may have had our vaccines, but there is still so much we don't know about COVID and its variants. And as humans, we believe that if we can know the future, then we can feel in control and safe. Nevertheless, we don't know. We do not know the long-term effects this will have on the world and, for example, our ability to travel. We don't know the long-term effects on social distancing. With Zoom having been the new norm, will it drive us further into individualism and isolationism? Will we as a church emerge stronger and more unified? Well, I have a hope that this will indeed be the case. But there are issues of control at play. This trauma we have been going through brings with it a feeling of powerlessness. We have no control over our pain, so we attempt to emotionally compensate by grasping for something we can control. We see this in the news. And, we try to find someone to blame and to be the scapegoat. Or try to predict the future by becoming armchair experts. Unrealistic dreaming, that may be what we do. We can become prone to obsessive behaviour in our everyday life. Maybe you're like me, where you kind of read and watch the news 10 times a day, just trying to get a grasp of understanding and control. Or exercising and dieting to the nth degree. Or it could be trying to get control by cleaning the house over and over again, or being over-organising in your behaviour. Or just taking it out on your partner or kids. However, what if it is okay that we're not in control? What if the uncertainty of life with the new coronavirus could be one of the best things to have happened to our spiritual formation? I've long held the belief that the wrong use of control can be destructive. It can block, hamper and derail our spiritual formation into people of love, of joy and of peace. And it can also hamper and derail the spiritual life of a church, a community of people. In Christianity, there are 3 theological virtues, and you may be familiar with them at the close of 1 Corinthians 13. It says faith, hope, and love. However, when you think about it, control is incompatible with all 3. So, as disciples of Jesus Christ, we are exhorted to become people who live with faith, a deep confidence in Jesus, and having his mindset ruling our lives. We're to become a people of hope, an expectation of the coming goodness based on the person and promises of Jesus, and to become a people of love, of compassion, and a commitment to delight in the soul of another and to will their good ahead of your or my own. When it comes to faith, controlling people do not live with a deep and steady trust in God's goodness and involvement in their lives. Rather, their lives are characterized with anxiety, fear, and being constantly uptight. When it comes to hope, controlling people are not full of hope for God's future. Instead, they're in a vicious cycle of planning, belt and braces, and are then become derailed by deep disappointment when things don't go to plan. And then there is love. Controlling people are not loving. They tend to dominate, manipulate, and bully other people to get them to behave the way they think they need to behave in order for them to feel okay, rather than love and accept and delight in the people that they are and honour the dignity of their free will. The need to control is very common and very human. It is a base problem for many people. So, is there another way to deal with uncertainty than grasping for control? Well, it is illustrated in the story in the Bible of Israel in the desert in Exodus 13, from verse 16. It's where God takes his people into the desert for teaching and testing. And instead of the direct 11-day route to the promised land, he takes them in the opposite direction for a more circuitous route. Well, to cut a long story short, could it be that God used or uses this roundabout way to show that the journey is far more important than the destination, that who we are is far more important than where we are or where we're going? God does not give Israel a map and a schedule. He gives them his presence, the cloud and the fire, as a guide. It's a relationship of trust. Now, whenever Lynn and I go to a new city on our holidays, either in the UK or abroad, the first thing we do is either get on a tour bus or we hire a tour guide. And we did this in Oxford last year. We didn't know the city. We didn't know what were its hidden treasures or where to get the best ice cream. It was very hot. But having a tour guide, we quickly develop a relationship of trust with the guide and to trust his wisdom and leadership. And in so doing, we then can relax and enjoy their company and spend the day listening to their wisdom and knowledge of the history, the culture, and the geography, and the best eating places. Now, if I can bring myself to trust this wisdom and leadership of our Father God, then I can relax. God is with his people, out in front, a step ahead. Remember, in the wilderness, God provided manna each day, their daily bread. And the lessons we can glean from the Exodus story is this. We can look to this story of Israel and learn. We can learn to camp around God's presence and trust him to lead and guide us through COVID-19 and our season of socio-political unrest. And through this testing, to let God form us into people who are ready for whatever is our own next chapter. And also just to live gratefully one day at a time, on our own manner, on our own daily bread, and being grateful for all that we have today, with all its good and all its challenges. We must fight off the urge to grumble, instead give thanks for our daily bread. You may know of the Prayer of Serenity. It's the one that begins with, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Well, it goes on, it continues with the words, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, and accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, and trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will. COVID-19 is proving to be our own involuntary desert. There is a stripping away right now of all the peace and prosperity we are used to. And many of us are just left bare and exposed to our anxieties and attachments. I believe we're living in a transition from a pre to post-COVID world. Transitions can be extraordinary times for growth. It's these confusing in-between, these liminal spaces with all its uncertainties where God does some of his best work. Holy uncertainty is the capacity to live with a very loose grip, or even no grip at all, on our plans, and more important, on the outcomes of our plans, because our security is rooted in a relational connection to God rather than in a full sense of control. And in the desert seasons, the dark nights of the soul, the dry and the spirituality that is being stripped down of our emotional enjoyment of God himself, which is not in cruelty, but it's in love. The dark nights, the dark seasons are designed by our guide to set us free from our fear-based need for control. And if we look through Scripture, we see that the majority of the Psalms of hardship, well, they don't end with resolve. They end with, well, God, things are really bad, and I don't always see your hand at work, but I trust you. We can learn to thrive in the uncertain times if we can learn how to live one day at a time in grateful trust. As one Christian writer wrote, we mature by meeting life just as God and nature designed it, and accepting the invitations that beckon us ever deeper into the heart of life itself. Holy uncertainty doesn't mean we don't make plans or we don't plan for the future. It just means we make them and let go of the outcome at an emotional level. We strategize and do our best, but we make peace with the fact that we're not in control of what happens. And, that is okay. So, let's make our plans, let's get our life ready, but then set those plans down and have a good laugh. And to be detached from the outcomes, but tether ourselves, yourself, myself, instead to God's presence and peace. And breathe. And take it one day at a time.
Lord, thank you that in the midst of our circumstances, you are lovingly at work, stripping away all that gets in the way of trusting you. Help us, Lord, to stand on the promise of Psalm 62, verses 1 and 2. My soul, find rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken.